much, and welcome to IET Berkshire event on renewable energy. So I am Dr. Abhay Sumanasena. I'm the chairman of IET Berkshire Network. IET is the largest professional organization in Europe. So we organize events like this that matters to engineers. Our ability to do these kind of events actually depends on the contributions from the committee that I chair. So we have done many things like this. As you can see on the left-hand side, we've also won an award for the most rewarding external partnership. So if you like to be a part of this successful committee and do help us organize events like this, please let me know. I have some vacancies at the moment. Now, today it's all about renewable energy. So, but before I introduce the speaker, let me remind you our next event, which is the value of spectrum in a 5G world. So on the 24th of September at 7 o'clock in the evening, I will be speaking about the value of spectrum based on some of the work we have done recently on spectrum valuation and 5G. So if you are interested knowing about 5G and valuing of the spectrum, please join. You can Google IET Berkshire and register so that you can attend the event. Now, I would also like to let you know that today's event is recorded and the slides will be available in our website later on. So the way I think we would like to run the event today is let's give Shagnik, the speaker, to go through his presentation, and then at the end of his presentation, he'll take all the questions you may have. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A button and type your questions there. Please do not use the chat window. Please use the Q&A. If you click on that, you can type your questions there so that I can follow them. Okay, so we aim to finish by 8:15, the latest. We target at 8 o'clock, but latest, if there are, depending on the questions, latest we will finish by 8:15. And Shagnik will try to answer as many questions as possible. So how do renewable energy technologies play a role in achieving our net zero goal? I think to answer that question, we have an excellent speaker today, Shagnik Murthy, who's the head of the client relationships, ports, rail, and nuclear at UK Power Networks Services. So he's currently focusing on developing collaborative energy infrastructure solutions with customers and channel partners that harness distributed energy resources and new technologies such as battery energy storage, electric vehicle, and infrastructure, microgrids, and also other power distribution solutions. So Shagnik is a professional qualified engineer, member of the IET, and has an MBA from the Thunderbird, USA. He has more than 20 years of international business management experience, from entrepreneurial startups to large enterprises involving high value, long life cycle projects. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Shagnik Murthy.
Good evening, everybody. Wow, I'm overwhelmed and humbled by the level of audience interest to attend this webinar. I can see on my screen there are about 276 participants. And thank you, Abhay, for the warm introduction, and the IET Berkshire local chapter for the opportunity to present this webinar. Last year, when the UK became the first country to legislate a net zero target by 2050, is set in motion an accelerated push to deploy ever more renewables and low carbon technologies to build a flexible and greener energy system. I welcome you to join me on a journey over the next 45 minutes to understand and explore how the world we live in will continue to change and transform, impacting our lives in ways never imagined before, and how we as individuals and businesses have a role to play in this transition to a more sustainable, flexible, and resilient energy future. Before we dive into the presentation, let me take a minute to quickly introduce my current employer and also make a disclaimer that the slides presented do not represent the views of the distribution network operator, UK Power Networks. I work for UK Power Network Services, which is the unregulated arm of the DNO. The DNO is responsible for the electricity network in the London and the Southeast, making sure the lights stay on for 8 million customers. We in UK Power Network Services are a strategic energy partner for our clients. We help design, build, operate, and maintain assets across critical infrastructure, aviation, rail, utilities, defense, ports, nuclear, so to say. And what these slides will also show is that it's a recognition of the energy transition that is taking place in the marketplace, that companies like us have evolved and continue to evolve our business value proposition, where we are adding value to our customers from consulting to design and build solutions to operate and maintaining the assets, and also providing capital finance solutions, all designed to increase the productivity of client assets, decarbonize their infrastructure, and also to realize the infrastructure as a strategic asset, so full end-to-end solution. Now let us take a look at the UK energy market trends. This is a slide showing what the world greenhouse gas emissions looked like in 2016. And I must thank an old college friend of mine who was kind enough to share this slide. And I said, okay, I'll use this as a cheat sheet, but it also helps to set the scene for where we are for the globe. And you can see that the energy sector consumes the most use in different activities across transport, electricity, heavy industry, industrial processes, agriculture, land use, all these different ways that we use energy and the processes create greenhouse emissions. And the energy sector is one of the largest contributors towards this, and across the subsectors of transport and all. So to 75% of carbon dioxide is produced from us human beings using energy in different ways in our lifestyle. It's important that because I'm in the UK, I'm talking about the UK focus presentation, where it is talking about the energy transition that's taking place, because the UK acts as a trendsetter for the rest of the world, having been on this journey for a long time now. In June 2019, the UK set a legal target to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And what does this mean for us to visualize in our daily lives? The implications: the Committee for Climate Change visualizes the scale of the challenge, that the electricity system will have to grow by twofold to fourfold from where it is currently today. The offshore wind will grow from 10 gigawatts to 75 to 100 gigawatts. Hydrogen production will also have to grow from 27 terawatt hours to 370 terawatt hours. And the carbon capture and storage systems would also have to build up, scale up, to capture the carbon dioxide which is produced in these processes. We'll have to reforest 10,000 to 50,000 hectares per annum. 29 million existing homes will have to be installed with low carbon heat. Zero carbon cars, whether they're battery electric vehicles or fuel cell vehicles, at the moment they stand at 250,000. And this will have to grow to 35 million in the 2040s. You'll have a large scale landscape change, like which will affect 20% of our agricultural land. There'll be major changes to diet and our lifestyle. The consumption of beef, lamb, dairy will half. What does that mean in terms of an energy trilemma? An energy trilemma is a buzzword that is bandied around in the industry, but it is essentially the balance between the energy security, energy affordability, and energy sustainability. And to explain it simply, three vertices of the triangle mean different things to different people. So if you think about it, like emergency services and hospitals, you think about them. For them, energy resilience is very important. So they're right at the apex. A blue chip IT company, for them, energy sustainability and energy security, there's a balance between that. Whereas for a retail shopping mall, energy affordability, the cost of the energy bills is important. So that is where the optimal place is right in the center, but different businesses have different needs. And so it is this constant, dynamic between these three cornerstones of the energy trilemma that businesses and individuals play around with. The important thing with the energy transition to net zero is the recognition by oil and gas majors such as Total, Shell, and BP, who are transforming their organization to become low carbon entities over the next decade or so. So yes, the world is acknowledging this and we are moving towards that space as well. The price of electricity market on the whole sale markets, what's happening with this transition towards low carbon technologies is that a significant amount of small scale generation is connected to the distribution network. And as renewable sources, wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun doesn't shine all the time, or it may be shining continuously on a summer's day, means that the wholesale electricity prices are very volatile. And renewables have also increased the cost of managing and balancing the electricity network. So it's very important for businesses to develop an energy strategy because the changing nature of the market affects your options and that you could use to source your future requirements, and to also recognize trends in the market and the feasibility of potential technologies, contractual arrangements. As the energy landscape continues to become more cleaner, more intermittent, more decentralized, and with renewable generation continuing to form a larger part of the total generation mix, it was 34% in 2016 versus 5% in 2014 or 4% in 2010. So it has been growing very fast. You have more than 25% of generation capacity disconnected at distribution level, not at the transmission level. The distribution level goes up to 132 kV in the UK, and transmission level is 275, 400. That's where the offshore wind projects typically connect to. We've seen solar PV, wind turbines, batteries, the costs of these technologies have fallen rapidly, which means more wider uptake and increase in community-based and local energy solutions. The picture on the right shows an example of a community energy project, which is the largest in the UK. It raised more than 20 million for wind turbines and a ground-mounted solar array, and the members receive an average 8% return on their investment. What is happening as a result is that this trend, the local authorities and local are actually trying to develop their own local energy markets. And UK regulator Ofgem, their problem becomes more challenging. They need to keep the interest of the network companies and system operators aligned with that of customers. And they're trying to keep regulation technology neutral, not partial to one technology over the other, and also encourage new innovation. The distribution network operators are also transitioning to distribution system operators. It's also seen how Ofgem wants to turn your street green because it is mandating and expecting the distribution network operators in the next regulatory period to make anticipatory investments for the rollout of low carbon technologies such as heat pumps and electric vehicles. It's a recognition of where the market is headed and how Networks are trying to adapt to this transitioning future. Local electricity networks will take forefront going forward. This data is taken from the BIS Duke's publication, which is a digest of UK energy statistics published in 2020. It shows that renewables have actually grown to 37.1% of the total energy generation mix. That is the first time it has crossed over 1/3 of the total generation in the UK. And 23.8% comes from wind and solar, 13.3% comes from thermal renewables and hydro. Nuclear, along with wind and solar, they form about 54.4%. So the electricity which is supplied in the system is already very clean. And electricity consumption from the grid has actually fallen by 1.7% in 2019 to its lowest level since 1994. That means that more and more people are actually consuming their own electricity. And to get us to net zero 2050, there will be ever more new renewable technologies deployed, like wave and tidal, floating wind, renewable hydrogen, and ever more massive expansion of battery storage. The National Grid every year publishes its future energy scenarios. So this year was no different. A couple of weeks ago, they published July. And what these two graphs show is that the three routes, like they have mapped it, like if you have a steady progression and then three more customer-led, two customer-led solution scenarios leading the way, customer transformation and system transformation. So in all the scenarios, by 2050, over 90% of electricity generated will come from four technology types: wind, solar, nuclear, and bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. Bioenergy means biomass, renewable biomass that will be burned as well, and then hydrogen sources too. And National Grid sees a boom in renewable energy projects, at least 3 gigawatts of new wind power capacity and 1.4 gigawatts of solar generation every year from now until 2050, alongside a widespread rollout of electric vehicles, which will effectively act as smart charging batteries to help balance the electricity grid. And on the right side, what it also shows is that the end consumer demand, like people like you and me, when we are in charge of when making our behavioral changes, we'll see that consumer transformation and leading the way will have the lowest consumption. That's around 600 terawatt hours. And that would be mostly formed of electrification. So the future is electrification. Nuclear will also, I'll be remiss, like if I don't mention nuclear, it's still a low carbon source of electricity. It has another thing against it around like disposal of the irradiated fuel. But nuclear will remain a part of the clean electricity mix, probably more in the form of small modular reactors rather than large nuclear build. And SMRs, as we call them, can be used to produce hydrogen through electrolysis of water, which requires huge amounts of electricity. And nuclear reactors also produce high temperature heat, which could also be made available to heavy industries such as metallurgy or glass production, or redistributed to homes around the country. So the impact of the changing energy landscape, let's talk about that. And this slide actually is probably maybe more interesting to students or the curious amongst us. A bit of electrical engineering fundamentals here. And what this shows is the challenge when you have more distributed energy sources on the grid. The grid operators, their challenge is to maintain the system frequency at 50 hertz at all times, because that is how our appliances and machines are designed to work as well at 50 hertz. With a small bandwidth available to them to play around with, 49.5 because systems trip. And frequencies can fall below 50 hertz when the supply is less than demand, means when there is not enough generation on the system and there's a lot of demand on the network. At that time, National Grid requires flexibility from the market, and either they will ask generators to increase the supply, or they will ask people to decrease the demand. Likewise, when there's excessive supply on the system, like on a very sunny day when the sun is shining and people are out on the beaches and all, and there's not enough consumption, then the frequency would rise above 50 hertz. In those situations, the grid operator would require flexibility to decrease supply or increase demand. So there's a constant challenge of balancing the grid or synthetic inertia and response. Inertia is a very interesting one because when you had in the traditional systems, like historically, the system was very centralized. You had these large rotating machines like 3,000-ton rotors spinning around in large nuclear plants and coal power stations. If they tripped, they wouldn't come to an instant stop and it would keep rotating. So the frequency wouldn't drop from 50 to 48 straight away. It would drop slowly, but with more uh, power electronics based generation sources like wind turbines and solar on the system, this inertia is disappeared or is a short supply. And that's why there's a need for synthetic inertia, which can be provided by battery storage. So what does this challenge lead to? It leads to an opportunity, which we call demand-side flexibility. For a reliable, flexible, or reliable electricity system, the supply must always match the demand. Now, all energy users can change the electricity demand in three ways. You can either turn down the use of electricity, you can change when you use your electricity, at what time of the day. Businesses can do that as well, identify when it is peak, or when electricity prices are high. They can say, okay, let's consume, take a production process at a time of the day when it is less expensive, consume that electricity, or they can turn on or increase production from on-site generation. It could be as a CHP engine as well, or using more of the solar PV on the rooftop rather than from the grid. There's an example that on a windy or a sunny day. And if they have excess electricity generated on site, or if they have battery storage which can get charged, they can benefit from new income streams from ancillary services by providing frequency response services to the grid, or participating in the balancing mechanism, or energy arbitrage, trading that excess electricity in the marketplace through demand aggregators. So this whole system of demand-side flexibility and distributed energy system has given rise to a whole ecosystem of players. So what you see here in this slide, what it's telling you is the impact of the changing energy landscape. You're seeing technologies and solutions cropping up to support the evolution of a decentralized, decarbonized, and digitalized energy system. See smart meters, see flexible generation and storage, see demand-side response, multi-vector technologies, smart integration of EVs, and blockchain technologies, and AI and machine learning technologies will continue to thrive, enable the ecosystem to incorporate ever more larger numbers of distributed energy sources that supply electricity to the grid. We have spot trading transactions to verify, so which can't be humanly possible to track these transactions. So you need blockchain and automated software to do this. You need visibility, interoperability standards, which will need to be embedded maintain options for smart management, market participation. So you can see it's becoming a more complex system as well. But what you get out of it is flexibility as well. This leads us to decarbonization of transport and heat. Like electricity decarbonization is in full swing and has been happening since the early, like the middle of this, from 2010 onwards, and 2020 there was a target as well. But what about the transportation sector? What this slide is showing us is that 450 million tons of CO2 is the total net greenhouse emissions from the UK in 2018. It was down from 2017. In the graph on the right, you can see the blue line at the top, the energy's greenhouse gas content has come down, but transport is relatively stable throughout. So to the extent that transport is the highest emitter at 28% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions as well. So what needs to happen to take this down? as well is what we will explore over the next few slides. Electric vehicles. So we have approximately 32 million cars on the roads now in the UK. Our population is predicted to grow, but the number of vehicles doesn't necessarily grow with it because it's forecasted that due to a rising uptake of autonomous vehicles and increasing public transport, that individual car ownership will not go it so far. And no new cars will be sold with an internal combustion engine after 2040. But by 2030, you could have 11 million EVs and in excess of 30 million EVs in the 2040s. So EVs can support the rollout of renewables. The batteries in them can be used to store excess generation and also export to the grid when required. So you get your vehicle to grid solutions as well. So smart charging technologies to shift significant demand of hours. So you can charge them at night and or when you're parked in your office car park during the day. So again, the National Grid scenario forecasts that by 2050, up to 80% of households with an electric vehicle will smart charge, and up to 45% actively will provide vehicle-to-grid services and offering up flexible electricity to manage the peaks and fill trucks in demand. Moving to light commercial vehicles, buses, and HGVs. In 2018, electric vehicles accounted for less than 1% of the 5.1 million vans, trucks, and buses on the roads in the UK. But we are beginning to see the electrification of light commercial vehicles, starting with light vans, where the product range is limited but growing. The electrification of road transport could lead to a 30% increase in today's electricity consumption by 2050. And for larger heavy goods vehicles, hydrogen fuel cell powered versions are also seen as an option in the future. Britain's first all-electric bus town, that's a project going on, will also pave the way for green communities of the future. A town with 200 electric buses could save around 7,400 tons of CO2 each year, the equivalent to taking 3,700 diesel cars off the road. But the key to all this is the electric charging infrastructure and the hydrogen fueling infrastructure is required to enable wider rollout of these cleaner forms of transport. Because the challenge with all these vehicles joining the road is that you need to have an infrastructure to provide that public charging points, both for buses as well as the electric cars. And bus electrification, as it picks up pace, you will find that yes, they will double the cost. So the electric buses will double the cost of the diesel equivalent, although they do have a lower total cost of ownership. But you also have to invest in the charging infrastructure of the depots. Now, currently, the catalyst for adoption of electric buses are local government policies. For example, London, Manchester, where to secure the operation of a route, the bus companies must commit to electrifying the fleet that would run on it. Moving on to aviation. Now, aviation, it must be acknowledged that these are indeed very tough times for the sector, with the levels of activity not expected to return to pre-COVID-19 levels for the next 2 to 3 years. But return they will because it is a key driver of the global economy. International aviation generates 37% of global CO2 emissions. So yeah, they are guilty. So there's a lot of public scrutiny around the emissions and noise generated by the aviation industry. Before COVID, it was at an all-time high. And aviation is looking at short-term mitigations to reduce its environmental impact through the procurement of more fuel-efficient aircraft. For example, the Airbus A320neo is 13 to 15% more fuel efficient than existing models. Airbus also has plans to launch a hydrogen plane by 2030. And there are electric planes. Some of the world's biggest industrial names from Boeing to Siemens to Rolls-Royce are all working on plans to bring electrically powered aircraft to the market. Now, there are a wide range of predictions as to when electric flying will actually become commercially viable, but there appears to be a consensus that it remains unlikely that people will be flying long distances on all electric planes. Hybrid planes are most likely the way forward. And if you reflect back on this is where transport sector has evolved with hybrid vehicles. Think about the Toyota Prius, cool, trendy car to own in the late 1990s. It was only 1997, and 20 years later, you got electric vehicles. So yes, the transition is on its way, and it's happening across sectors. Maritime. So you get shipping, and it's amongst the only industries that is not covered by the Paris Agreement on climate change, and it contributes to 8% of global greenhouse emissions, burning as it does dirty, heavy fuel oil. Now, from 1st of January 2020, the International Maritime Organization has regulated that all ocean-going vessels have to utilize low sulfur fuel or have scrubbers fitted to remove sulfur emissions. We also have ocean-going vessels that will run on low-carbon alternative fuels, hydrogen and ammonia, which are in development, but they're at least a decade away. We'll also have electric container ships and electric ferries, but which are more suitable for short sea shipping routes. Like later this year, the world's largest all-electric container ship, Yara Birkeland, 80 meters long, 3,200 tons in weight, is expected to make its maiden voyage, commissioned by a Norwegian fertilizer company. It will move product around the country, having capacity for 120 containers, taking 40,000 diesel-powered truck trips off the roads of Norway annually. And interestingly, this will also become a crewless, fully autonomous vessel at some point in 2022. Now, ports. A quick win via proven technologies to reduce emissions at ports, but one that require investment by the port operator with a currently weak business case, and that will only be introduced if legislation requires it, is for power to be supplied to vessels that are at the quay side via a direct connection to the port's electrical network and transferred without interruption, so-called cold ironing. And this will allow generators on the ships or the vessels to be turned off, and the direct connection from the shore would supply electricity to power the systems such as lighting, ventilation, fire systems, thereby eliminating emissions from the running engines on vibration and noise. Cold ironing is a shipping term used when ships had coal-fired engines, and when in port, the fires would not be fed and the engines would eventually go cold. Cold ironing will be a challenge to supply enough electricity to power a single ship, let alone multiple vessels in harbors simultaneously. And to accommodate this increase in electricity demand, ports have the options of increasing the capacity of the connection to the distribution network, or use renewables, wind, solar, combined with energy storage to create a microgrid. And I think there's a theme going here. You've got the transit and you've got the ports like shipping. Similarly, in airports, you've got the planes which you need to electrify, but also a greater impact can be made in airports as well, so where you can deploy similar sort of solutions. And as environmental challenges pose that the electrical powered infrastructure is being faced, the port of Rotterdam, one of the world's leading smart ports, you can see gigantic unmanned cranes lift containers from vessels, while electrical automated guided vehicles, a truck with no cab, transport containers to storage facilities. And these containers are lifted automatically onto road vehicles. The emphasis is on a quick turnaround for the vessels to unload and load and minimum handling by the port authority. We will increasingly see more integrated, greener transport systems in the process. That takes us into the rail sector. The rail sector contributes a mere 2.6% of its greenhouse emissions. So it is by far the cleanest form of transport in the country. The railway traction is the biggest emitter of emissions in this, but most of the traction electricity that is supplied from nuclear power, which is already a low carbon form of electricity. So the main emissions in the rail sector comes from diesel trains. And a significant modal shift to rail will be required. And if that shift is to be a driver for a green future, then a diesel rethink is certainly part of the agenda. And with the government's announcements to ban all petrol and diesel engines by 2040, the rail sector has to replace diesel trains with either electric, battery, or hydrogen trains. And track electrification, while being expensive, still represents the best whole life option for an intensively used railway network. Battery trains with ranges of up to 50 kilometers can be used for branch lines where high track electrification costs do not justify the business costs. But hydrogen trains with a range of up to 600 kilometers are viable alternatives for passenger trains on non-electrified routes. There's about 15,000 single track kilometers in the UK that are non-electrified. 11,000 of them have a good business case for electrification. The others can use battery and hydrogen trains as well. And pictures on the right are just showing where the technology is and the trains that will be coming onto the network in the next few years. Battery trains from Hitachi, the Alstom Breeze hydrogen train, or the Hydroflex hydrogen train. Non-traction power involves stations, depots, and buildings which can be decarbonized using solar PV in combination with battery storage. Such low carbon stations will have station car parks fitted with EV charging infrastructure, allowing rail users to charge the EVs. And shifting freight from road to rail offers a 76% carbon reduction, and the industry is innovating with into the city concepts, bringing light goods to city centers with the use of vans and trucks. So perhaps a more localized economy that requires less travel and transport is the only real answer to a carbon zero economy. But until then, green stations and door-to-door green journeys that support active travel will continue to develop. Looking at heat. Now, the decarbonization of heat is recognized as one of the biggest challenges we face in meeting our climate targets. Why? Because heating our homes, business, and industry is responsible for a third of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions. So later this year, the government is planning to publish a heat and building strategy report, and this will be delivered as a combination of green gas and heat pumps. That is what the delivery strategy. There are suppliers in the marketplace like Good Energy that have launched or will launch UK's first ever tariff for heat pumps in the autumn. And this tariff will help make it more cost effective to run a heat pump, offering cheaper unit rates at different times of the day to ensure consumers can benefit from surplus renewable generation or low demand on the grid. The number of heat pumps in the UK is expected to double by 2025. Many think more needs to be done to promote the technology and drive down emissions from heating. The picture on the right shows an example of an air source heat pump, which is a Mitsubishi appliance, absorbs heat from the outside air, which can then be used for underfloor heating systems, warm air converters, or to provide warm water for radiators for hot supply. And again, National Grid's future energy scenarios paints a picture where 2050 could see 20 million heat pumps or 17 million homes with hydrogen boilers, with as many as 8 million homes actively managing the heating demands by storing heat, shifting the use. The picture on the right shows a project which is currently well into its way in the demonstration phase at Keele University, where a blend of 20% of hydrogen by volume is being pumped into the gas network alongside natural gas to 130 homes and faculty buildings. And this is demonstrated to show that yes, hydrogen can be supplied into the local gas network as well. So in summary, you can see that there are two routes to decarbonizing heat. A customer transformation journey where residences will adopt electric heat pumps, or a system transformation scenario where the network operator, the gas network operator, will have hydrogen pumped into our homes and businesses to the gas network. There is a place for both, and as technologies evolve, you will see greater deployment. And taking us with the end of a presentation, we couldn't finish without talking about the hydrogen economy. Is it a silver bullet or part of the mix? Now you have to remember about hydrogen production. Like most of the hydrogen produced in the world today, more than 90%, is produced by industrial processes, and it involves steam methane reformation, where natural gas is treated with high temperature steam. Carbon dioxide is a byproduct, and that is why you need carbon capture and storage to capture this carbon dioxide produced. And green hydrogen is hydrogen produced by electrolysis of water using electricity produced by low carbon energy sources such as offshore wind power or nuclear energy. And a new study by Aurora Energy Research claims that hydrogen generated from renewable energy and natural gas could provide more than 45% of UK's final energy demand by 2050. And this is based on a combination of blue and green hydrogen. And the supporters of the hydrogen economy state that the UK hydrogen production needs to be between 200 to 300 terawatt hours, because hydrogen can be used for heat, hydrogen can be used for long distance freight, for example, road and shipping. Hydrogen can be used as energy storage of excess renewable energy, or hydrogen for heavy industry, for steel production use, hydrogen instead of coke for reducing iron. And the pictures on the right show some projects which have been deployed, like ITM Power, for producing green hydrogen using their electrolyzers. And this is already available at a number of Shell forecourts in the UK. And Ørsted, and one of the world's largest offshore wind developer, has a project called Gigastack, where they are producing, using the offshore wind produced on the farm, electricity. It is being used to electrolyze water, produce hydrogen, and then being fed to the Humber refinery. So this is the project which is just kicking off, and this shows how the hydrogen produced from offshore wind can be used for industrial processes. And we reach the end of the presentation. And summary, what I'm trying to capture here is renewables and flexibility. They work hand in hand, and they can help reduce the cost of energy. We can ensure price stability with flexible technologies, integrating renewable energy assets by using flexibility and energy storage technologies, use of carbon footprint. And you must be wondering, what is this picture on the right? And before I get to that, I'm just saying that net zero in 2050 may be theoretically feasible, highly desirable, but there's a distinct possibility that could also fall short. What we want, and the most important change, is a rapid, well-coordinated program across government to focus research on key technologies that mandate system changes, intervene in the markets when necessary, cover the risks that private sector cannot bear. And talking about the image on the right, this is just being picture. There's a poignant story behind it, and built to adapt. Why I call it built to adapt is, this is a bridge in Choluteca River in Honduras, a region famous for storms and hurricanes. A Japanese firm built it in 1996. It was opened to the public in 1998. Unfortunately, Hurricane Mitch hit the region that year, and all the bridges in the region were destroyed, all but one. The new Choluteca Bridge survived. But there was a problem. The road connecting the bridge was swept away. Even the river had changed its course. It created a new channel, and the river now flowed beside the bridge. It became a bridge over nothing, a bridge to nowhere. Lots of times we focus too much on solutions to a given problem. Sometimes the problem itself changes. Built to last may have been a popular mantra in the past. Built to adapt could be the way to go. So with this, I end my presentation, and I'll open it up to question and answers now. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Agnik.
Uh,
Interesting talk. So we have a few questions coming in. So firstly, question from Richard. If we are using vehicle batteries to store energy for domestic use, how do the vehicles move? So did you mention about
vehicle batteries to store energy? Okay, now the vehicle batteries to store energy, the batteries will still be in the vehicle. You're not removing the lithium-ion batteries. They will still be powered when they are plugged into the home charger, right? So you plug your car into your network. I'll just stop sharing this screen for a second, and I'll just come back to the audio. So yeah, when you're talking about, so you're not removing the batteries from the cars, they're still plugged into your network at home, you're charging it, and you have these clever technologies where your car can actually communicate with the grid through this demand aggregator, and they can decide when to charge it or not through very clever software technology. So the car is still parked in the garage, the batteries are still part of the car, so you're not driving off without your battery. You can't.
Okay, so the next question is, renewable seems to be dominated by inflexible solar and wind, which are weather dependent and not demand driven. So why biomass generation is not really, used or exploited as much as it could be. So do you have any thoughts? Wind, anything about it?
About it, like, yeah, biomass, certainly renewable biomass, that is what they call it, like the forests that are renewable biomass, basically biomass generated from forests in Canada in the North American markets, and then they're shipped over to the port of Liverpool, and then they're sent over to Drax Power Station and they're burned. That is bioenergy. And the process is like those trees are replanted and then they grow back. So there is a case of biomass too, but and that is where bioenergy will also form part of the mix as well. How sustainable it is, and that is a question. But yes, there is a business case, and as you call about renewable biomass point. Yep.
Okay, so Angus, I think making a statistical point about, so nuclear only counts as low carbon if you only take it at the phase when it's generating. So if you include CO2 production in its construction and decommissioning phases, it makes it pretty carbon heavy. Do you have any thoughts on that?
And I think that is the same with every construction activity, what we call embodied carbon. Embodied carbon is the carbon that is the content in the materials that is used in any construction project, even your home. And when you build your own house, what is the carbon footprint on that house and the construction technique employed? So that is another way of looking at it as well. So even if you were to build a large wind farm, then yes, there is a bit of embodied carbon in the. So technologies are evolving. There are smarter technologies to reduce the amount of concrete mixes being used, polyfiber reinforced concrete techniques and other techniques which are more sustainable to reduce that. So yeah, there is an argument against every technology of how you can offset carbon or not.
Okay, so Steve is asking, how are we planning to move from low carbon to zero carbon networks by 2050?
I think the idea is net zero. You cannot be true zero in the sense, because whatever you are producing, if you can offset it by going negative carbon emissions, then you are becoming uh, net zero in the process. But going to absolutely zero carbon, that needs a big change. And it's going to be very hard because you have to think about your daily processes and your lifestyle, how you can actually generate zero carbon from a lot of things, your whole life cycle.
Okay, so this is from Kevin. He says that UK doesn't have many locations suitable for large scale hydropower via dams and pump storage. However, we have lots of rivers. So why are we not taking the opportunity to tap into the this energy source?
Right. So you're talking about these micro generation projects. Scotland is prime territory for having run of the river turbines for, like, yes, dams and pump storage. You really need large locations and it's not always conducive. But run of the river generation technologies are there, but you have to think about it. They don't produce a lot of energy as well, long streams and all. You can probably, you don't have a river running around in the back of your garden, right, to fuel your own electricity. You have to remember that an average household requires 4,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. here, and sometimes you can stick a micro turbine or a solar PV. So the question is whether run-of-the-river generation technology can produce energy in sufficiently large volumes to house a vast population. Yep.
Okay, so this is again from Richard. How many towns have a bus fleet of 200? Do you have any idea?
I think there are not many like that, but I think it probably lends itself to the larger cities. So you've got programs in the city of London, you're looking at Manchester, and these are the larger cities with quite a large fleet of buses where you can deploy that. But even in the smaller cities, when I say smaller, Birmingham is not small, but I am sure if Birmingham wants to go to an all-electric bus town, they can surely do that as well. There are 9,200 buses in London, for example.
Okay, so Andrew is asking just 2 points about your slide 22 says 37% of GHG emissions from international aviation, but in slide 8 it says rail, ship, aviation and pipeline combined account for only 4.3%.
Okay, I'm glad somebody's keeping a track on data. Slide 8.
Slide 8
Okay,
and 22. So
just
it
trying to
may be.
say rail, 4.3 rail, airship, and pipeline. That is end use activity, how the energy is used. That is not the emission. And the emission is in the right. So that is the emission of CO2 74.4%. It is where is the transport energy being used. Okay, so 4.3 is the use, how much of it is consumed, okay, of energy. It's not
So
in the emission. So the emission data comes, if you look at slide, I'm just trying to find my decarbonization slide. Slide 19 is where you will see the breakdown on the transport and heat. So these slides, I think, will be made available so you can take them apart and the dissection on that.
okay, thank you. And Richard is asking, where will all the batteries come from? How are they disposed of?
Okay, that's a good question. At the moment, the battery technology is based on lithium ion, and we do recognize, and I personally do recognize that the lithium is a finite element, and all the vehicles in the world can't be powered by battery vehicles. But until such time that hydrogen fuel cells do become a part of the mix, lithium batteries at least have a life for at least 10, 15 years before hydrogen fuel cells just start taking over and become more prevalent and common. That's a solution.
Okay, so the Steve is asking, what percentage save is likely from decarbonizing airports and ports regarding air and shipping carbon generation?
Like the, as you say, 37% is aviation and shipping is 8%. So it's quite a long way to go because the main, like ports and airports, will make a dent, but most of it comes from the marine fuel use or the airline fuel use. So once you move to biofuels or to low carbon alternative fuels, that's where you will really see a massive reduction in GHG emissions.
Okay, so Richard is asking, heat pumps are sophisticated, very expensive devices and needing a lot of maintenance. Are they really a viable mass solution, particularly for domestic?
It's a very good question. Heat pumps, electric heat pumps are relatively simpler machines. They just work like a refrigerator inside out. But yeah, if you were to deploy it for a 3-bedroom house, you're probably looking like at a 10 to 15,000 pound expenditure. And now the government has launched its green house grant scheme where they're encouraging houses and domestic properties to take up some of the subsidies to fund some of that heat pump as well. So it's a mix, like, yeah, but it will get there and have a few status to make them more viable for use. Yeah.
We have loads of questions, so I'm going through in
You
the
know, you
order
got
they arrive.
61
So
open questions. Yeah.
I guess when it comes to the same theme or same points, I will skip them if you have answered. So
Sure.
the next question is from Sammy. In regards to ships, do you think it'll be likely for charging infrastructure to be in place in the middle of the oceans? Or maybe wave power could contribute towards?
Oh, that's very left field. I don't think that's going to happen anytime in the near future. That's a long way away. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so Ajit is asking, I think he might have a number of questions. So question one is, some countries are already moving away from nuclear power generation, like Germany. Is this likely to happen in the UK and other nations at some point in the near future or future?
And I
If
think
so,
nuclear, yeah, I think nuclear is very much part of the mix, at least for the foreseeable future. I think they provide a really stable base load, and I don't think there's any plans to cut it out of the mix. It's very much in the mix and to the 2050 plan. So I think whether you have 10 plants or whether you only have 3 plants, that's the other question. But yes, they will certainly be around.
okay, so someone is asking, why does tidal energy not feature very highly in the UK policy? Because it's very predictable and can be used to
And
generate hydrogen.
and it is a good question. And yes, there have been tidal projects which have been trying to developed in the UK. Unfortunately, the Swansea Tidal Bay Lagoon didn't pass muster. They're still trying to keep it alive. But there's also the Mersey Tidal Project in the Liverpool Bay, which promises to generate anywhere between 4 gigawatts to 8 gigawatts of tidal power, and which can supply around 300,000 homes. So there's definitely a push with the mayoral support in Liverpool, and it can also supply a large population in the northwest. So we're hopeful that there will be government support for that and to take it up, push through. Yep.
So next question, until I digest that question, it's a long one. So move to the next one. Using EVs for storage appears to be an expensive and complex solution. What is the efficiency of using EV storage, and why is it preferred to demand management time of day pricing?
I think, yes, there's not a lot of energy density in vehicle batteries at the moment, but when these batteries are sat in a car park and then there's a sufficient mass of this available, at some point you can use them for V2G charging. But at the moment, there's not a mass movement towards that. And I think as the technology evolves and you get more dense battery powers in vehicle, because there's efficiencies of cars as well. So you need lighter batteries, and so the energy density suffers. But as the technology evolves, vehicle to grid charging will become more and more popular. Bus to grid, there was a project which has just been launched in London as well. So 28 buses will be connected at all times, and for 1 megawatt of power to be generated and supplied to the grid as well. So you see that.
Okay, so Peter's question is about actually what mechanisms are being proposed to cope with local high loads from electric vehicles and heat pumps or excessive feeding from local renewables, example PV.
I think, yeah, no, it's a question to do with local energy markets. As these local community energy markets are developed, then yes, individual homeowners can become part of that mix. And there are companies that are rolling out such solutions where you can sign up and probably have this little device which is fitted to your electricity meter and which can actually communicate over a peer-to-peer trading scheme using blockchain in order to transact energy. So if you're producing electricity and your neighbor is away, but they've got an EV stood in the driveway and that needs charging, they can buy the electricity, solar PV of you and charge the battery, and vice versa can be done.
Okay, so Adrian is asking, how do we avoid creating new environmental disasters with the switch to renewables?
And I think that Adrian needs to elaborate what environmental disasters he has in mind in terms of new renewables, and then we can probably address that question. And yeah, there is certainly every technology has its challenge, and it's all risk mitigate by adopting the safety processes that would be less harmful to the environment. So be conscious of that. Yeah.
Steve is asking, when will CCS be encouraged to be introduced?
I think there is a definite movement, the push for CCS. I think in the past, CCS has got the short change. I think if blue hydrogen has to have its day in the sun, then CCS has to be a part of the mix. There are projects happening in the northwest, northeast of the UK clusters where CCS will definitely come online. It's all part of this energy white paper, which is yet to be published by the government, but that will definitely see that national infrastructure strategy rolled out and published.
Okay, so the next question is about, how do you see grid level storage in UK's electricity network to manage intermittent generation of electricity, especially wind and solar?
Yep.
Yeah, it's any thoughts on that?
I think how do we see grid level storage to manage? Yes, there are grid storage projects, and then I think some recent changes have happened where large scale front of the meter battery storage projects have got a boost from the regulatory perspective that they don't need planning permission, or they need, but you can, it's becoming more easier to deploy 50 megawatt plus battery storage projects. Those sort of storage projects will connect invariably at the transmission level. There's a lot of storage, and there will be more as well coming through. So,
Okay, so the next one is interesting. Andrew says, July's IIT magazine had an article, The EV Life Cycle Conundrum. It suggests over life cycle and EV uses 50% or more of the carbon of a petrol car. Forbes suggests 75%. So both exclude carbon consumed to recycle batteries. How can 30 million, yes?
I think it's an interesting question. I probably have to read this issue, you know. I think this is the issue is referring to. I've just used it as my mouse pad. So Andrew, I'll probably have to read that and then come back to you with an answer on that one. I'm just going through the questions, yep.
Then John is asking, are there any UK-based companies manufacturing heat pumps?
I'm sure there must be some. I know I have a picture of Mitsubishi, but I can't see off the top of my head if there's people manufacturing, but I'm sure there must be somebody out there. But there's definitely technologies where the Japanese are leading on that one. Just have to do a Google search. Sorry, I'm not that close to that supply chain.
Ian is asking, what can you say about the power and energy required of energy storage systems in the future?
Okay, yeah, this is something. This is to do with long duration batteries, and so there's long duration batteries which will also connect into the grid and for requirements. So, and they make a case for them in the capacity market as well. So then they are not subjected to derating. So, yep, if you have power, if you have 1 megawatt, then you need a 4 megawatt hours. So technologies like flow batteries or sodium sulfur batteries will be certainly part of the mix going forward in long duration battery storage. Yep.
Okay, so we've already passed 8 o'clock. As I
10 more
said,
minutes.
I will stop at 8:15, so I'll go through as much as possible. The next one is, why do the scenarios show such a rise in electricity demand? Why did we plan to lower limit energy demand?
Exactly. Yeah. When you look at that slide about the national grid energy scenarios, Bob, whoever asked the question, sorry, you will notice that if it is our behavior which impacts the energy consumption, and those two scenarios, which are called leading the way and consumer transformation, they have significantly less electricity demand than the other two scenarios, which are steady progression or system transformation. So we are in control of our own demand and consumption. And you'll be pleased to note that the electricity consumption has actually gone down by 1.7% 2019 to its lowest level in 1994, because more and more people are relying on their own local generation, solar PV on the rooftop and off-grid technologies where they're not consuming electricity from the grid. Yeah.
So Bob is asking, do you think that the change to a low carbon economy is being carried out fast enough to avoid a climate catastrophe?
Oh, then I think it is just a question of how fast you can take the change through. I'll just give an example, like to think about big numbers. You have 1 million seconds is 12 days. A billion seconds is 30 years. So it all puts into context, like how much time you have to go ahead and make those changes to support climate change impact. So whatever we can do in our own ways, in our own lifestyles, and yeah, to limit the impact.
Okay, so then next question I'm going to give to different people who haven't asked question or who haven't got answered. So Dan is asking, in regards to maritime, I saw a report that shipping could hugely reduce CO2 emissions just by slowing down. Is this likely to be feasible?
Yes, it is feasible. What they call is slow steaming. So instead of going at, I'm just thinking of the 40 knots on the sea, they will go at 15 knots. So a reduction in speed definitely reduces the amount of fuel consumed by ocean-going vehicles. And of course, switching over to biofuels will also reduce that emission going forward. Yep.
So Alan is saying, I recently read an article about the storage of energy using compressed gas. Is this really viable?
Yes, it is viable, and I think there's a liquid air project happening in Manchester. It has been going on for years, and finally it is seeing the light of day, and it is happening. It is compressed gas, compressed air technology, so which are released, which is compressed in liquefied form, and then when it is released, then you can transfer it into energy, electrical energy to drive a turbine.
Yeah, so Thibaut, I think, is asking about why don't we include fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage, especially as a way to keep the grid balanced?
A good question. When the large power combustion directive came out, which required all coal plants to close down, there was a plant called Longanet in Scotland, which had proposed carbon capture and storage to go alongside it to capture the carbon dioxide produced by the coal plant. And somehow the business case didn't stack up. That the cost of the CCS solution at that time didn't justify the investment to keep extending the plant lifetime, and it didn't make sense. And anyway, coal is getting phased out. There's no coal almost on our system. So yeah, not happening. So use it with hydrogen, blue methane, blue hydrogen production techniques for sure. They will require CCS.
Okay, so this is from Duncan. I think is not CCS. I think carbon capture and storage, if I understand correctly, because you just mentioned I'm a spectrum expert, but I'm learning energy. So is CCS by far the most important thing, not only to reduce future emissions, but to reduce CO2 currently in the atmosphere?
Uh, it is an expensive solution. You have to remember, where does the carbon get sequestered? At the moment, the CCS technology is you capture the carbon dioxide and then you pump it through the caverns in the North Sea oil fields, which have been emptied of oil. And so those are the reservoirs for storing the carbon. And that is where these CCS technologies. So there's enough, how to say, cavities available in the earth and seabeds to store all the carbon? I don't have an answer for that. It's just for somebody to explore that. But yeah, CCS is definitely in the consideration in the mix.
Okay, so Alex is asking, you mentioned about nuclear SMRs. I
Yeah.
don't know that, unfortunately, but what do you think about the government's plan for a new, big, expensive reactor?
Yeah, he's probably referring to Sizewell C, which is a 3 gigawatt nuclear reactor being developed by EDF Energy in the East Coast. And small modular reactors are still about 10 years away to develop. And I think the first ones, there are a few companies looking at that, Rolls-Royce, Westinghouse, and all, exploring 300 megawatt, 400 megawatt blocks, which are also going to become in about 16 sites are being explored. So there's a mix for SMRs and large nuclear build. The SMRs are being more privately led as well.
Okay, so time is running out. I'm going to be now try to pick for the short questions. So Steve is asking, surely biomass is still contributing to the GHG emission issues?
I agree. I agree. And that biomass, when fitted with CCS, will take away some of the pain points or the criticism of biomass as a polluting fuel. But I am yet to be convinced about renewable biomass where you are cutting down trees and then reforesting. Is it enough time for those trees to then take out carbon dioxide from the air? So, yeah, I'm not sure about biomass. In my personal opinion, that's me.
So Rick is asking, what are your thoughts on contribution to micro generation, contribution of micro generation?
Contribution. Which is that one? Where is that?
Um, so it's household solar panels of future generation from perhaps solar windows.
Oh, you're just scrolling through. I was looking somewhere.
Yes.
Okay. All these possible, but who will pay for it? Just another question. What is your question again? What are your thoughts on contribution micro generation household for from perhaps solar windows, 4 panel generators? Yes, there's a space for that. Also, you've got paved gen as the tiles which you can walk and produce electricity, and all these sort of technologies have a space. You just have to. There are energy providers like Octopus Energy and others who will pay you to consume some of the electricity under negative electricity prices. So you can make money in the process as well, having your own generation technologies. Yep.
So there are a couple of questions about tidal wave power. Anything?
Jonathan, I did mention in passing that yes, there is tidal and wave power in the mix, and that has been around, and just somebody needs to commercialize it at scale and make it happen. They do have a future, and there is a space for that as well. I'm absolutely for that as
So
well.
next one further down is how liquid hydrogen will change the game.
Liquid hydrogen will change the game. Talking about liquid hydrogen for fuel cell operation, I'm assuming that is a question. So yes, that will be certainly fuel cell vehicles. And that is why I said lithium ion cannot sustain all the battery electric vehicles. There will be an increasing push towards fuel cell vehicles. A fuel cell is powered with hydrogen fuel and which then produces electricity to drive electric motors and the cars. So yes, there is certainly a big uptake happening of that as well. Yep.
So probably the last one, I think much further down, Chagnik, Zishan is asking how much CO2 is generated by 1 kilowatt hour and how do we calculate it?
How, how much CO2 is generated by 1 kilowatt hour? How we calculate it? Whoa.
Go back to basics.
That's the basics. But 1 kilowatt of what? 1 kilowatt hour of what technology? That is what depends, like CO2. So search Google. I'm sure you will find the climate change statistics available. And actually, probably those would be the good sources. And they will tell you for each different technology how much is the CO2 contribution by burning by 1 kilowatt of power. Yep.
Okay, I think unfortunately we have to leave it there. So before we go away, I'd like to thank basically the support staff from IET, Julie, and my fellow committee member, Keith, who has done a lot of work behind the scene to make this happen. And finally, Shagni, thank you very much. Fantastic. I learned a lot. So I'm no energy expert, but I did certainly learn some interesting things. I didn't know third of the UK energy comes from renewables. So thank you very much. Simple, clear, and you shared your depth of experience, knowledge with a 295. It's a record.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. And I appreciate
So
that. Thank you for the opportunity. I really
thank you.
enjoyed that and fielding those questions. I think the audience really kept me on the toes and they really kept sending it fast and furious, but I really enjoyed that. So thank you so much for giving me the chance, Abhay, and for the audience as well. So really enjoyed that. Thank you. And I will look forward to a recording as well and hopefully get a chance to go through the questions and see if I can still answer some at some point. Thank you.
Okay, and finally, thank you all for joining. Audience, you have been brilliant. You asked lots of questions, which is what we want. And please send us some comments. And also don't forget the 5G spectrum valuation event lecture on the 24th of September. Don't ask difficult questions on that day. And that's all. Thank you very much and have a great evening. Bye
Thank
for now.
you. Thank you, Abhay. Thank you, Julie, as well. Bye-bye now. Bye.